We've all heard of the Spartans, those super disciplined warriors with their sick hoplite armor and their badass helmets with the red, angry eyebrows. But what many people don't know is that the Spartans weren't the only ones who looked like that. In fact, the entire Peloponnese was equipped with this unique style of armor, which made them look like they just walked out of the pages of an old history book. The Peloponnesian warriors were united in one key aspect, their appearance, but divided in everything else. They were constantly at each other's throats, fighting over land, resources, and power. And this struggle was so intense that it would eventually break out into the most devastating war in the ancient Greek world. A war that pitted neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, and even family against family. This was the Peloponnesian War, a conflict so complex that its story can only be told through the tales of battles, betrayals, and alliances. Our story begins in 461 BCE, when a Spartan nobleman named Archidamus decided to take his revenge on the city of Megara. Ever since Megara had left the Spartan-led Peloponnesian League and joined the Delian League, a union of Greek city-states led by Athens, relations between Sparta and Megara had been very tense. Tensions that became too much to bear for Archidamus, who led a Spartan army to lay siege to the city. But Archidamus did not fight alone. He had allies from within the Peloponnese: Corinth, Sicyon. Three of these allies were united by their hatred towards me. Corinth, because Megara had stolen their colonial possessions across the sea in Italy. Sicyon, because Megara had killed their king while he was visiting the oracle at Delphi. And Phlius, because Megara had seized some of their territory. Sparta may have been the powerhouse of the Peloponnese, but they needed all the help they could get if they wanted to defeat the powerful Argives. Despite being outnumbered, the Megarians put up a valiant defense, thanks in no small part to their strong navy, which kept the Spartan army from bringing in reinforcements or supplies. But their efforts were in vain, as the Spartan king eventually managed to capture the city. The Spartans executed the male population, sold the women and children into slavery, and turned Megara into a Spartan colony, ending any hope of independence for the Word of the Spartans' brutality reached Athens, who had obligations to protect Megara, but was unable to do so because they were still recovering from the costly defeat they suffered in the previous war against Persia. Athens and her allies would come to regret this decision, because the Spartans would use their victory as momentum to declare war on Athens and her allies. Starting off with the neutral city of Mantinea had never been a part of the Delian League, but she had good trading relations with Athens. So when Sparta came knocking, demanding that she join the Peloponnesian League, she refused. In response, Sparta and her allies laid siege to the city. At first, things were looking bleak for Mantinea, as the combined might of the Peloponnesian League was too much to bear. But just when it seemed that the end was near, reinforcements arrived. Leading the relief force was none other than the great general of Athens, Cimon, who managed to scare away the besiegers and bring back stability to the city. Once he left, however, Sparta seized Mantinea once again, and this time they would not make the same mistake they made before. They left a garrison to keep the city under control and set out to finish what they started. This time Cimon would not be there to save the day, as he had recently passed away. But Athens would still send another great general, the brilliant tactician and future statesman Nicias managed to lift the siege and brought Mantinea back into Athenian good graces, securing their alliance for the remainder of the war. As Nicias was marching back to Athens, however, news arrived that sent shockwaves throughout the city. The Spartans had invaded Attica, the region around Athens, and were pillaging everything in sight. Nicias immediately dropped everything and raced towards the front lines to stop the Spartan advance. He would meet the Spartan army at the Battle of Eno. The Athenian force was bigger, thanks to the reinforcements that had been sent to aid. But despite having more soldiers, the Athenians were outmaneuvered by the Spartans and almost lost the battle, until Nicias rallied his troops and launched a counter. The Athenians ended up winning a minor victory, but both sides claimed it as a triumph, and peace returned to Attica until the next Spartan invasion 4 years later. This time Nicias was prepared and met the Spartan army at the Battle of Tanais. The outcome of this battle would have a profound effect on the course of the war, because unlike the inconclusive battle at Inophyta this time, the Spartans would win a decisive victory and claim all of Boeotia as a Spartan and Peloponnesian ally. At the beginning of the war, the Spartans had focused on conquering the Peloponnese, but now they were eyeing Attica. Nicias knew this, and after regrouping his forces, he marched into Boeotia to prevent them from doing so. Nicias and the Spartans would meet at the Battle of Leuctra. This time, Nicias would be the one to suffer a decisive defeat, which allowed the Spartans to lay siege to Athens. with the Athenian navy keeping the Spartan fleet at bay. The Athenians were confident that they could hold out until the end, but they hadn't counted on the tenacity of the Spartans, who would lay siege to the city for no less than 4 years. The Spartans fought so hard to conquer Athens, because it was the key to breaking the Delian League and ending the war. And the Athenians fought so hard to hold out, because giving up meant losing their empire and influence. As the years passed, the Athenian resolve started to crumble as their food supplies dwindled, and disease began to spread throughout the city. Finally, in 421 BCE, both sides would agree to a truce, which would allow the Spartans to capture Athens and the Peloponnese. But the rest of Greece remained in Athenian hands, along with the loyalty of 2 key allies, the Argives and the Corinthians. To secure the Argives' loyalty, Athens agreed to marry their king Leotychides to an Athenian noblewoman. Meanwhile, to secure the Corinthians, Athens went out of her way to insult them. After a group of Corinthians attacked an Athenian ship, Athens took it upon herself to attack and sack the Corinthian city of Samos. In response, the Corinthians would switch sides and welcome the Spartans with open arms. When they came to invade central Greece, it seemed like the war was going Sparta's way, and then the plague happened. An outbreak of malaria struck down thousands of Spartans and forced the remaining citizens to retreat into the countryside. The Athenians, seeing an opportunity to turn the tide of war in their favor, invaded the Peloponnese, forcing the Spartans to abandon their invasion of central Greece and go home. When the Spartans realized that the Athenians were taking advantage of their absence to pillage their homeland, they tried to stop them. But the Athenians proved to be too much to handle, and the Spartans were forced to sue for peace. However, the treaty was broken soon after, as Sparta switched sides and invaded Attica once again. But their invasion would be short-lived, as Cleon, an ambitious and hot-headed politician, would lead a surprise attack on the Spartan army and force them back to Sparta. Cleon then continued his campaign of terror by invading the Peloponnese, pillaging the countryside and destroying whatever he could find. Corinth was hit especially hard, which caused them to switch sides once again and seek Athenian protection. In the meantime, Cleon turned his attention to Melos, a neutral island that was known for its wealth and strategic location. The Athenians would lay siege to the city, but the Melian resistance was fierce. Cleon grew impatient and gave the order to assault the city. But after suffering heavy casualties, he was forced to withdraw his troops. As the siege dragged on, Cleon was recalled to Athens to deal with an internal revolt. And once he was gone, the Melians broke out of the siege and sought refuge in Sparta. This enraged the Athenians, who would make an example of Melos to show everyone what would happen if they sided with Sparta. The Athenians would lay siege to the island once again, but this time they wouldn't take prisoners. The men were put to death and the women and children were sold into slavery. And that brings us to the end of our story, the point where all the allies and betrayals finally come together in a last-ditch effort to win the war. Sparta calls upon all her allies to invade Attica, while she herself marches towards Athens. Will Athens fall? Will Sparta? Or will this war drag on for even longer? I guess we'll have to find out next time. Thanks for watching.